Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the Environmental Protection Commission meeting. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask Commissioner White to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and the invocation. Commissioner White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, I'll ask that if you're able to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. For those of you watching this meeting virtually, you should have an image of an American flag. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the beautiful community in which we live and for the clean environment that we're so blessed with here because of this agency and many other partners. I'm also thankful for the shelter over our heads, the food on our tables, and jobs for our families that are made possible by various industries. And I pray that you will guide this board, our staff, and stakeholders this morning as we make decisions to keep these things in the appropriate balance. As always, Lord, I want to pray for all of our first responders and members of our armed forces, that you will guide them, comfort them, and keep them safe each and every day. I ask for all of these blessings in your heavenly name. Amen.
And thank you, Commissioner White. At this point, we call the rolls. Would staff please call the roll?
Good morning, Smith.
Here.
Hagan.
Here.
Kemp.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Merman.
Here.
Overman.
Here.
White.
Here.
Carlos,
Thank you. You have a quorum.
you need to do it in the back. That's call them.
All right. And Ms. Doherty, do we have any changes to the agenda or any removals from consent?
Commissioner, no changes to the agenda.
Thanks. So now we move into public comment because commissioners, we have no recognitions and proclamations today. We had none at the board meeting either. COVID is putting a damper on our celebration. So we move to item 5, public comment. And I understand we do have one member of the public waiting to speak. So staff, if you would connect that person, I think it's Mr. Hazinski.
You have the floor. Go ahead. Ryan Hazinski, good morning, Honorable Hillsborough County Commissioners. I wanted to address all of you today once again about the issue with the River Church. Today is now August 13th, and though they did stop, the River Church did stop for some time, they have now since gone back outside and are continuing their nightly concert series, which is coming into our homes once again. At this point today, this morning, I sent an email to all of you, and I hope that you read it. There is a list of enumerated reasons for why we should just completely repeal the exemptions for religious institutions. Originally, this was not my position. I wanted to simply modify the religious exemption. However, based on these points in my email, I feel it would be easiest to simply repeal the religious exemption. First and foremost, the city of Tampa has no such exemption on the books in its own codes. There's obviously confusion between the EPC code versus the code that is issued by Hillsborough County. Perhaps most importantly was something that was said by Reggie Sanford, one of the EPC directors. He noted that on average, a religious institution might receive one complaint a year, or the EPC receives one complaint a year regarding religion. In the article on the the article in the Tampa Bay Times, Mr. Sanford was quoted as saying he has never in his memory thought of a time at which a church went on like this and did this, as I said, this scale and duration in my comments on July 15th. Now, they originally planned on canceling that to be done on August 14th, which I was okay to let them just do their thing for these final days. But they have since switched their announcement to where there is no end in sight. It now just says nightly shows at 6:30 p.m. And so the easiest thing would probably to just be repeal the exemption altogether. And if the church wants to have these kinds of events, they can apply for a special event permit, which according to VOCC guidelines and Hillsborough County ordinances means that they can do this kind of concert for up to 7 days in a given 365-day period. For an entire week and a course of a year, I'm very moderate in my position. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but they can't continue to do this, especially blast off fireworks in the middle. You know, they had another fireworks display on July 31st that went over 92 decibels for 8 minutes. There are military veterans nearby who I know have PTSD. We have to do something to address this situation. I thank you for your time today and look forward to working with you in addressing this.
Commissioner Smith, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment?
No, ma'am.
All right, that will close public comment. And that takes us to the consent agenda. And at this point, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Miller, so moved.
Second.
I've got a motion from Commissioner Miller, a second from Commissioner Merman, I think, to approve the consent agenda. If there's no discussion, we'll take a roll call vote.
Smith,
Yes.
Hagan,
Yes.
Kemp,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Merman,
Yes.
Overman,
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
And that takes us to the regular agenda. And I'm really looking forward to this.
Commissioner Smith?
Yeah.
I don't know if you all are getting, but I'm getting a lot of feedback from someone.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sounds like somebody's not muted.
I think all of EPC staff is supposed to have their cameras off and, except for Rick and I, and their microphones as well.
There, it stopped.
Okay, is that better?
I still hear somebody.
Somebody. Yeah, I do
Yeah,
too.
it's something like they're brushing up against something.
Mhm.
Ms. Doherty, I believe it's your microphone or your headset or one or the other, because it does seem to show that when we hear that, it's your mic that's, okay, it stopped. I think it was that. So you'll need to turn your mic on and off when you would like to speak. I'm sorry.
All right.
Thank
Okay.
you, Commissioner Overman.
Ms. Doherty, would you like to introduce the presentation? Just try to hold still.
Yes, Commissioner. I will be bringing up Sterling Woodard. He is the director of our air division. We also have Reggie Sanford here to answer questions if need be after the presentation. But he will be introducing the presenters who will be giving the agenda item 8A, which will be near road air quality and the use of low-cost community and personal air monitors. This was requested by Commissioner Overman and Commissioner Kemp, and I know Commissioner Smith, you've had an interest as well as the other board members. So with that, I will introduce Sterling Woodard.
Good morning,
Welcome,
Commissioner.
Mr. Woodard.
Jason, could you bring up the slide?
Sure, it's coming up. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
right. Good morning, Sterling Woodard, EPC staff. I'm here this morning to introduce Jason Waters, who's our ambient monitoring chief, and Dr. Amy Stuart, who's a USF professor. They're going to come this morning and talk to you about the near road air quality, the impacts, exposures, along with the potential of low-cost ambient monitoring. Jason is going to basically provide you with an overview of the air quality and the data that we've collected from our air monitoring site, which is over near the University of Tampa on Monroe and LaSalle Street. We've had that monitor there for about the last 6 years, and it's been collecting data about the emissions that are generated close to I-275 and the I-4 interchange. Dr. Stuart is a PhD in environmental engineering from Stanford University. She's been a professor of environmental health out at USF for about 15 years. And we worked with her in the past on atmospheric deposition, nitrogen, mercury deposition. She's a well-published author and a researcher. And while Jason is going to talk to you about the data that we've collected and some of the analysis, she's going to be able to take the data that we have as well as the national data and give you a perspective on what it means, the health impacts, the exposures, some even the inequalities in exposure, and some of the things that can be done from a planning perspective to mitigate some of those impacts. But before they come, Jason's going to come first, and then Dr. Stewart is going to come second. But before they come, even though we're going to be doing this presentation about air quality, I want to remind you that we are, for the first time in the last 30 years, in compliance with every ambient air quality standard, okay? It's been difficult, and since I've been here for the last almost 30 years, we've been in some state of compliance, non-compliance, and even been unclassified when the EPA didn't have data to properly classify us. But we're pretty proud of that fact. But moreover, the entire state of Florida is in compliance with the ambient air quality standards. So I just wanted to toot that horn just a little bit. The next slide is that even though we've been in the midst of this pandemic, we have continued to monitor and maintain our network. We actually have the largest in the state, and we continue to maintain that. And one of the reasons why we've been able to do that is not just because we have a dedicated staff, but the EPA and both the DEP have said that our air monitoring program is mission critical to them continuing to be able to protect the public during this pandemic time. And also that our staff is mission essential. So we took that to heart and wanted to make sure that we kept the monitors running so that the public could be made aware of any problems or any changes. So with that being said, Jason's going to come up and talk to you about the near road site, and then Dr. Stewart is going to come right afterwards.
Sterling mentioned, I'm going to give you an overview of our monitor, particularly the near road monitor near 275 in the I-4 junction. And this first slide shows us our entire monitoring network on the left. Sterling mentioned to you it's the largest in the state. We have 31 monitors at 11 sites. Some of you may say, the common question is, how many monitors do other people have? Well, Broward's a close second with 27. Our friends across the bay in Pinellas has 18. They're number 3. It tapers off pretty quick after that. I believe Duval, Orange, and one other, Miami-Dade have a few less than that. Everybody else has less than 10 monitors in any given county. So Hillsborough County has the most number of monitors in the entire state. And we operate about 15% of the monitors in the state of Florida in this county. So on the right, you can see our near road monitoring station is near the 275 I-4 junction. We operate continuous monitors there for a variety of pollutants. We actually operate nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, because those are primary pollutants of concern for cars, along with ultrafine black carbon, a few other items at that site. So in 2010, US EPA revised what they call the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or a lot of people call it, we call it the NAC, the people that work in it every day. And they added a 1-hour standard in addition to the annual standard for nitrogen dioxide. And when they revised that standard, they required a near road monitoring station be set up. They based it on what they call a core-based statistical area. So you have this lingo, and the CBSA for our area is Tampa St. Pete Clearwater. That's what it's called. And based on how many people you had, it depended on when the monitors had to go in and at what time. So in 2012, when they did the assessment shortly after the 2010 NAC standard was revised, we had 2.8 million people in our CBSA. And that required nitrogen dioxide monitoring by 2014 if you had more than 1 million. And also fine particulate, they call it PM 2.5, and carbon monoxide by 2015 if you had greater than 2.5. We met that. Areas that were between 1 and 2.5 were able to wait till 2017 to do the fine particulate monitoring. On the right there, you see a picture of our near road site. You can kind of see it's a little bit below the roadway, but it's right near the roadway to collect that data. And it probably comes as no surprise that the I-275, I-4 junction, they want you to put it at the busiest intersection. It is the busiest intersection in our CBSA. They're cited based on that. The number of near road sites in the United States, there's 74 of them. We're one of 6 in Florida. We're one of 22 in the US that monitor and report black carbon. And we're only one of 5 doing that for ultrafine particulate, which is really, really fine, less than 0.1 micrometer. The next slide I want to show you is our nitrogen. Which one is this? This is our particulate monitoring. I've got my, it's covering up some of my slide. I can't read my own slide. This is our 5 particulate monitoring network across our county. We have 4 sites we monitor at, Apollo Beach, Gandy, Monroe, and Sydney. Sydney has 2 monitors because we are the designated reference site for that particular type of monitor for the state of Florida. So we have to operate in conjunction with something called an FRM monitor, which is a very precise monitor. And as you can see, we are well below the national ambient air quality standard for fine particulate. Next point I want to talk about is the nitrogen dioxide. So that, like I said, in 2010, they set that 1-hour standard at 100 parts per billion. And as you can see, our Monroe site, has been operated. This is last year's data, the entire year. And we're well below, less than 50% of the standard. And we generally hover around 20% of the standard. Carbon monoxide. And here you can see, again, a whole year worth of data. There's actually 2, there's a 1-hour and an 8-hour average standard for carbon monoxide. And you can see that at the top, I've listed the ppms, where the previous slide, I was able to put the entire range on. If I put the entire range on this one, since our values are so low, it would be barely readable. So we're typically less than 1 ppm on 8-hour or 1-hour averages, well below the national ambient air quality standards for carbon monoxide. The last one is our fine particulate monitors. I've put PM 2.5 and black carbon on here. You notice there's some missing data for PM 2.5 at the beginning of the year. That was due to a monitor issue. That's been corrected. The monitor's operating fine now. The black carbon, obviously, is a subset of the PM 2.5. So you can see that black carbon's not all PM 2.5, but it is within it. And again, this one shows the whole range of the standard. And you can see we're well below it. We're about, maximum values are about half the standard, and routinely we're about a third of it. So one of the things about near road site is everybody goes, well, I'll drive to work in the morning, I drive home every evening, and the traffic's bad in the morning and the evening. And this graph, while it's really busy, tries to depict the AM/PM shift of the cars, and you can kind of follow it. and there's a little bit of lag, but as you see it go up and down, that's your morning traffic pattern. And this is a 3-day period back in February of this year that we pulled to look at and show you. And we're looking at black carbon, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen oxides, which are all components of automotive exhaust. You can clearly see that there is a pattern that follows the traffic. But again, all these are below the 1-hour health-based standards and the 8-hour averages for our county. So I've told you that, we're doing well. Sterling said we're in attainment for the first time, and that's been a long time. He's worked here twice as long as I have, but it's the first time I have seen it as well in the whole state. So we're in good shape based on the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. I'm going to turn my presentation off and hand it over to Dr. Stuart, who's going to take this kind of information and tie it into the localized monitors we were talking about. And she's also going to do some other analysis, as Sterling said. So let me see if I can get this to stop. Here we go.
Good morning, Ms. Stewart.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you all about near road air pollution and the potential of low-cost monitors. Let me get my slideshow going here. All right, so first I'd like to start with, so thank you again. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity and then the invitation. I'd like to start with just with what sort of defining what we're talking about here. The term that's used in the literature is traffic-related air pollution, or TRAP, which is really the complex mix of many pollutants that are elevated near roadways. And these concentrations of pollution are highest within a few hundred meters from a roadway, and they come from vehicle fuel combustion. Is an important source. Also solvent and fuel evaporation from vehicles, and wear on tires and brakes and road surfaces. So generally speaking, the more traffic there is, the higher pollution levels. Some of the important pollutants that we are concerned about for traffic-related air pollution and near road air quality are the nitrogen oxides that Jason mentioned, and NO2, or nitrogen dioxide, being the criteria pollutant that is part of that comprises that, as well as these particles, different types of particles. We're concerned about particles in multiple size ranges, from the larger or coarse particles, PM10, to the smaller fine particles, PM2.5, and the ultra-fines, which are a really good indicator of the combustion emissions, as well as black carbon and diesel particulate matter is a category that is particularly concerning from a health effects point of view. For gases, we are concerned about carbon monoxide levels being high near roadways, as well as some toxic organic compounds like benzene and butadiene and acetaldehyde and formaldehyde. And finally, some metals and some toxic metals are elevated in this mixture, including lead and antimony and manganese. All right, so so why are we concerned about near road air pollution? Well, this is a graphic that talks about, in general, health effects of air pollution. And there was a study done in 2010 by the Health Effects Institute, which basically compiled all of the health effects data for traffic-related air pollution to really say, okay, there's all these studies. What's the preponderance of evidence for a causal link? And that work showed that asthma, exacerbation of asthma, and onset of asthma in children is clearly causally linked with near road air quality. In addition, both total premature mortality, premature death, and cardiovascular related death there's a lot of evidence for suggestive of that causal link, as well as respiratory symptoms and cardiovascular disease in general, and impaired lung function and lung development in youth. And also there is some evidence, but not as conclusive in general population studies for a link, an association with some cancers as well as some adverse birth outcomes. And the populations that we're concerned about from a susceptibility and vulnerability point of view are infants and children, elderly people and people who have heart and lung disease, as well as people who are active outside and pregnant women. And additionally, there's a lot of concern about inequality in exposures to near-road air pollution because some disadvantaged groups are disproportionately affected by these health impacts. So for example, for asthma, that one that's clearly causally linked with traffic-related air pollution, the prevalence rates are higher for African Americans and for people with low incomes. And this is clear in data from HHS and from the CDC. Children living in poverty are more likely to develop asthma, and Black children are 3 times more likely to die of asthma than non-Hispanic whites, and Hispanic children are 2 times more likely to die of asthma. There's also increased cardiovascular mortality. African Americans are 20% more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites, as well as lung cancer mortality. And overall life expectancy is lower for those with lower incomes and for Blacks. And although these health outcome disparities are a combination of many factors, one of them is differences in exposures to hazards, including to near-road air pollution. So due to this, there's been some interest in research to try to characterize differences in exposures to traffic-related air pollution. And generally speaking, studies in the United States find that Black people with low incomes, living in poverty, and to some degree Hispanic populations are exposed to higher levels of traffic-related air pollution in general. And this is true for the Tampa area too. This research to do this is part of what my group does, a big part of what we do at USF. And so we've done studies on this over the last about decade. And we do that using both doing modeling, estimating concentrations based on emissions amounts and meteorology. And I'm showing here on the right side, circling it here, some of the results from the modeling for nitrogen oxides. And you can clearly see the high levels, those reds along the roadways. And we also do that through some field campaigns where we go out and measure with inexpensive, in this case, it was passive monitoring at different levels. This was near 75 elementary schools around the county to look at differences in concentrations, and we see similar patterns. And findings from all of this work do show those same differences that are seen around the United States, that exposures are higher for the Black population and people with low income. This particular graphic is for the elementary school study. And this last one here is looking at how does the disproportionate exposure, how does that disparity change as the concentration level increases. So concentration level is increasing from 0 to 100 percentile of exposure here. And this is a metric of inequality. So as it goes up from 0, that means the inequality is worse for that population. If it goes down from 0, it means they're less exposed disproportionately. And we can see that the Black population, as concentration increases, we see that their exposures get more and more unequal to that level of pollution for the Black population, say, compared to the white population. And if we look at income, if we look at poor people, that's even a more drastic signature. Those exposures are getting even more and more unequal to the highest levels of pollution. All right, so you might ask what we can do to reduce these emissions and exposures to near-road air pollution, and there's a whole myriad of options at multiple scales, from changes to transportation system design and infrastructure that focus on transit or bicycling and walking to reduce emissions, just reduce the number of vehicles and reduce emissions, or to put in more electric vehicle infrastructure. And that basically is taking emissions away from where people are and reducing, to some degree, reducing emissions overall. And also measures that have to do with roadway design, like noise and pollution barriers. Those also affect near-road air quality and reduce it. And some of the newer work is looking at sort of vegetation barriers that can act as filters or buffers to air pollution, so it's not as high where people are. And things like roadway elevation to just get the emissions up and away from where residences are. Traffic management can have some effects. In Europe, it's there's a lot of work on low emission zones. So just having the central area have restrictions on vehicle activity to reduce emissions where people are walking around, or high occupancy vehicle lanes can have some effects, reducing vehicles, and even signal timing. There's been some studies of some minor effects related to that. On a bigger scale, things like land use specifications in some areas, not allowing schools or residential housing within several hundred meters of high traffic roadways, or using parks and greenways as buffers from those high traffic roadways. Some building specifications can be useful, like having sealed windows facing a highway, or making sure intakes are away from where there's vehicle exhaust, or using filtration systems. But in addition to all of these design and engineering design and management approaches, there's also an approach for enabling personal choices so that people and communities can have activities and fun activities that are away from areas of high pollution. And the air quality index, like you see in your local paper, right, is a way to do that, right? Telling people what the levels are so that they can make decisions about what they're going to do and where they're going to do it. Okay, so to make these decisions regarding interventions and mitigation options that may improve public health, we all need good data on pollutant levels, both for policymakers need it and the public need it to make their own decisions. And air quality monitoring at stationary sites, like Jason described, has been used for several decades for this purpose. And traditional monitoring systems have many benefits. They are accurate and they are reliable. And there is a very high standard of quality, and there's a consistent standard of quality. This has been happening for many, many years. And generally speaking, the equipment have long lifetimes, so they're reliable for long periods of time. However, this type of monitoring also has some limitations for the types of decisions that have to do with things like near road air quality and personal health. They're expensive. They require a big footprint. There are limitations to where they can be put because of that, lots of power. They require a substantial level of expertise to maintain them and to interpret the data and to do the quality assurance that's necessary. And because of that, although we have one of the most extensive networks in Florida, if we're thinking about near road air quality and changes in concentration that occur over several hundred meters, having only 11 monitors in a county, that each site only measures, or at least most sites only measure a couple of pollutants, that does not give us a picture of the spatial signature of all the pollutants of concern, right? It gives us information at those sites. It gives us a general idea, but it doesn't give us information about where specifically pollutant levels are high and low. And so that spatial sparsity is one of the major limitations of this type of monitoring. In addition, there's usually a time lag in data availability. The data are not available real time in general, and that's largely because of the quality assurance procedures that go through to make sure that the data that is provided is correct and accurate. And the data, when they do become available, they're generally difficult for a non-expert to access and to understand. But people want to know what the air quality is where they live, where they work, where they play. And in addition, because this is government data, there is an issue with lack of trust, particularly in disadvantaged communities. So some of the emerging options for improved monitoring methods include systematic mobile monitoring using government and industry vehicles. So for instance, Google's going around and taking pictures of all of our roads and our houses, and some of those vehicles in some places also have air pollution monitors on them. Smart city sensor systems are really something a lot of people are interested in. So putting sensors on government infrastructure and throughout the city. And so these are both ways that are being used or tried to increase that spatial granularity, increase the resolution with which we can understand the air pollution levels. But these systems are big, require lots of coordination, and they are expensive and are likely to always be expensive. And currently, there's a lot of technological and other issues that remain in setting up and using these systems. And maybe most importantly, they don't address the aspects of community needs, getting people their own data and trust. So in parallel to the development of these sort of ideas about these larger systems, there's also been a real grassroots push for local community and personal data, which has been enabled by the growth of miniaturized sensors and monitors and apps. And I'm showing pictures of several different of these sensors and monitors here. So there are different types, like local community monitoring stations, like that here, where you put that on some infrastructure. And we saw that in the last slide as well. Personal stationary monitors that you might use for getting information about your own air quality around you, or personal mobile monitors that you could attach to your backpack or your purse, which is coordinated with its own app to tell you, to tell you what the air quality is as you move about your day and move in space and time. And some of these systems use crowdsourcing, so the data are being reported to a repository. And the Purple Air Monitor, I'm showing here a map from Purple Air, the Purple Air Monitor, which is a low-cost monitor that can, individuals set up, and the data gets relayed back to this web data repository, and then it's accessible to anyone who wants to go and look and see what air quality levels are near them, if there's somebody with a monitor near them. And some of these systems also begun to use artificial intelligence to try to estimate levels from the shared data, both to get a better estimate for the measurement that you get for yourself, as well as in places that there aren't monitors. And US EPA is really involved in the development of this and providing expertise and information in providing evaluations and data on evaluations of these sensors and monitors. There's an air sensor guidebook, an air sensor toolbox that they provide that can be really helpful to anybody interested in either getting a sensor themselves or trying to set up some sort of a system. So there are beginning to be many community projects that use these small sensors with funding from National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation and other entities, and joint ventures between community groups and government organizations. Some examples I'm showing here. One notable one is the Village Green Stations. These are, there are 8 stations around the country, and it was sort of a prototype approach, the first one being in Durham, North Carolina. And these are typically located in parks or near libraries or a science center or school, and meant to provide information and education to the public. They measure multiple pollutants, and they're using solar power, and data that is measured on these stations is available to people going by in real time through cell phone access. Another example is the Ivan Air Monitoring Network in Imperial County, California, and this was in response to some concern in a predominantly Hispanic community that was at high environmental risk. And it has 40 monitors throughout the county in several different places, at schools, near roadways, and other locations, measuring particles and mapping that data, and also providing a web reporting tool for violations, so people can say, I think the air quality, something's going on here. The Global Ozone Project in Air Trucks was an educational project, a sort of citizen science project at 100 schools throughout the world, with students and teachers monitoring, using both stationary monitors, mobile monitors, smartphone, and it had a smartphone app aligned with that, and web data sharing, measuring multiple pollutants that we're interested in for near road air quality, and really using this as an educational tool. And then the final example is the Clear Air Monitoring Network, which is hosted by Coalition for Clean Air. in Southern California with 272 fine particle purple air monitors and data sharing through the Purple Air site. Now, California is a kind of a hotbed of these community monitoring systems, in part because of the AB 617, which requires California Air Resources Board to have a clean air plan and to clean air action plan and to have community involvement and community monitoring in high priority locations. So these small sensors and crowdsourced data integration show a lot of promise for addressing some of the limitations of traditional monitoring for near road and community air quality purposes. Most notably, and the real reason why there's been such interest is that they're relatively low cost in comparison with our expensive, many tens of thousands of dollars traditional sites. So they can be affordable for individuals or local communities. They also provide highly resolved data. They provide data for a particular location. Therefore, if you can get lots of them there, you can get highly resolved data, or for a particular person who's interested in their exposure. They provide real-time data. They're designed to provide that real-time data. They're often app-enabled, not always, but many are. And part of the apps have have communication tools that try to translate the data into information that can be understood more easily. And some take advantage of crowdsourcing, like the web applications we saw. And EPA has been developing tools and repositories for this type of data. And I'm showing here on the right-hand side this kind of information that you can get from these, really showing that signature in concentration in a particular location and the variability in time of concentrations as well. So there's a real promise and interest in these sensors and belief and research to understand how they can help educate people and communities on science in general, as well as engage disadvantaged communities and susceptible individuals who have concern for traffic-related air pollution, and potentially to empower these groups to advocate for a positive change that improves their health. But unfortunately, we're still at a place where there's a lot of challenges of these sensors and monitors. Many of them are still largely unproven. The pollutants they can measure, at least the ones that are from the real low-cost monitors that an individual would buy, remain limited. There are a lot of cross-sensitivities between pollutants and interferences, and the data can be very inaccurate or unreliable, or it can lose accuracy or sensitivity or reliability over time. Typically, the equipment really has a short lifetime, about a year, and it's not usually designed for maintenance. And there's rarely diagnostic information with the data to help to validate the quality of the data. In addition, many of those crowdsourcing algorithms that are estimating your concentration level or estimating concentration levels in a field are proprietary. So again, that makes it much harder to evaluate how good they are. How good those data are. And there's just a lot of discussion in the research literature about the fact that the type of technology that's used to measure a signal in order to get to a concentration, there's a lot of calibration and model fitting that goes along with that. So questions about whether or not this is really a measurement or a model result. Additionally, it's that many of these provide very short time scale data, 1 minute data, and people can get quite concerned about high levels at 1 minute, but there's not a lot of evidence to sort of link that high levels at 1 minute to a health implication at this point. And so there's some concern about creating false beliefs based on not great data. And most systems and monitors are still require, and many of the examples that I showed are really systems where experts came in. These were partnerships with universities. So they still really require expertise to understand the data and certain uncertainties at this point. And so there's some risk involved in investing in these large scale systems due to this high turnover and failure and short life spans. And many of the projects, they work and they're very useful for a short period of time, but maintaining funding after initial project investment has also been a problem. So in summary, I hope I have convinced you that traffic-related air pollution and near-road air quality is an important public health problem, and particularly low-income and Black people are disproportionately impacted by these exposures and effects. There are many options for mitigation at multiple scales, but there's really also a role for enabling personal choices with accessible data. And low-cost monitoring by neighborhoods or by individuals is a good option to begin that. And I think that it's only likely to expand. I think it's likely to get better and expand. And this is a potential opportunity for the EPC to engage with communities to meet their needs by providing that really necessary expertise and advising. And in the long term, I would guess that we will see regulatory data reporting systems absorbing some of this type of data, but we're still pretty far away from doing that on a large scale. And before I finish, I just want to show a couple slides of references from the materials that were used to provide the information on these slides. So with that, I want to ask if there are any questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This was very informative, from starting with Mr. Woodard through Mr. Waters to you, Ms. Stuart, and thank you so much for putting this together and bringing this to us. These issues are very timely in our community right now. We are talking about the effects of this kind of pollution on our roadways in our MPO meetings. We're talking about this in our HEART meetings as we're converting from regular buses to less polluting electric buses. And these issues are of great concern in the community. And of course, now with coronavirus, people are really aware of how this kind of air pollution can make people vulnerable to these respiratory illnesses, and we're becoming aware that there's some great inequity there as you walk through. So I've got a couple of board members that do have comments and questions for you, starting with Commissioner Overman. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, both of you, for providing this presentation. I have been very concerned about this, and we have on our agenda over the next several years a significant amount of policy decisions that will impact our community and our citizens as a whole. And one of them is, what happens with our major roadways and transportation-related issues. And as the county moves forward with looking at its equity profile, how those decisions are made and how they're made in the context of equity is, I think, an important point. You made an analysis of various different health conditions that are prevalent in communities of color and communities of low income, which historically our road systems went through those communities, and consequently homes are right next to the interstate. And that policy has created long-term impact. So I look forward to addressing the changes associated with those highway changes that we see coming or being proposed by our local FDOT, taken into serious consideration. The challenge I have is the Monroe location is a location, and if we would take a look at page 5 of that slide, which shows Monroe surrounded by a lot of green space. Lots and lots of parks, lots of open space, lots of open area for those particulates to disperse on the just far enough away from the interchange that I would imagine, and a very high level of highway, because highway is much higher at that level than it is in other areas that 275 travels through, and I-4. So we're looking at numbers that don't look like the numbers that might be at 275 in Osborne, where there are 2 high schools and a county library and a dog park, or what used to be a pool, in a very open area where the interstate is very low. And so the particulate measurements there would appear to be much higher than they would at Monroe. So the choice of where that went, when there's plenty of open space but less green space, versus lots of open space and lots of green space, is interesting about where that monitoring station lies. So that's why I was asking about the partnership of either private or supplemental air quality monitoring. Because, for example, the library there, which is right next to the interstate, is a government building, which you mentioned would be a great source of opportunity to partner, would be a great place to add a supplemental monitoring that might be more affordable than what you've described. It, is typically, for example, at Monroe. How would we as a body make that recommendation, especially given that FDOT is currently doing its SEIS, or, environmental study and impact on communities as they look at addressing the changes or expanding the highway through the urban core? Ms. Stuart, can you give us some guidance on that, maybe?
I see Ms. Stuart has
gone away. Well,
yes.
Stuart taking her
Oh,
video.
there she is.
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, so I mean, I think that you make very good points, Commissioner Overman. I think this is a great opportunity, something like at that library, partnering with the US EPA, using their air sensor toolbox and potentially putting in, for instance, like one of those village green stations, something as an example station, that could be an opportunity. There's a lot of communities that are doing this sort of thing. There, the degree to which that it would be, it wouldn't be providing the same type of data that you're getting from the stationary monitor, the same quality of data, but it could provide some information to both the EPC and to the residents to learn about air quality and to understand air quality a little better, and to inform some of your decisions. So I do think that there is currently opportunities for doing something like that, using partnerships with, for instance, I'd be happy to partner on something like this, and partnerships with the EPA and using some of those lower cost systems for information. But I do think it's important to realize the issues with these types of monitoring from a regulatory point of view.
Are there specific ones that measure the similar regulatory measurements that are more comparable than others that could be utilized in that kind of partnership arrangement? And I'll stop there.
Yes, I mean, I think most of them are trying, especially the ones that are done in partnership with the US EPA, or are trying to get to a measurement that could be comparable. But that, if we're looking at what the levels are at over a few minutes, that's not going to, those averaging times are not similar to the standard. But you can get a level that is at the averaging time and for the pollutant of interest. But I do think there is some education that goes along with understanding this in comparison to the data that you get from the traditional monitors.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. And Mr. Woodard, do you have something pertinent to this piece of the conversation?
Yes, I just wanted to say one of the reasons why that monitor was placed there is because that section from the I-4-275 interchange all the way up to Dale Mabry is the most highly trafficked area in all of St. Pete, Clearwater, and Tampa. And that's where the EPA wanted it located because that's the highest volume. At the same time, these elevated highways, as well as the ones that are at grade, some are actually below grade. The EPA has been using this data to try to gather research to figure out if they need to be able to revise the standard and maybe even come up with some separate standards for near road sites. So we located it there because that entire section from I-275, I-4, all the way to Dale Mabry is elevated. So the issue is we had to place it there, but there's a house that's right next to that monitor, and we're only about 100 feet away. And the other issue is that Dr. Stuart brings up the issue of, in the future, there's going to have to be more partnering with research institutions and the EPA. And that's one of the reasons why we had her to come in, because several years ago, we've actually were working with her to try to develop a grant from the National Science Foundation to actually help her and assist her in setting up, some augmented monitoring sites. So we'd be happy to work with her in the future, because we do have some expertise, but we don't always have the resources. But she actually has the research, the knowledge, and the ability to do those things. So we're perfectly willing to work with USF and Dr. Stewart in the future to do that.
Thank you. And as well, that Monroe Station is near 3 public schools and public housing and the West Tampa Library as well. So there is, it is important to be looking at the pollution in that area and monitoring that. Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it does make perfect sense that it was put where it is with, and so I just want to say, I know that you said that you really could use, this is to Dr. Stewart, that, you could use many more stations in terms of getting a better resolution, a better look at the picture for pollution in the area. And honestly, I thought I heard somebody say something like $13,000 for one of the most significant kinds of stations for measurement. Did somebody say that during this presentation, or am I something like that? I'm just talking about a ballpark for one of these.
I think better for Sterling to answer this, but I understand that those kind of traditional stations are on the order of, $40,000 to set up or something like that.
Okay. But even $40,000, if that's accurate, is not. I mean, I think it's something we could think about definitely in terms of, and I don't know if they're funded with, grants from, as well as the EPA as well. I know that you had said we had the most in the state of any county, but we were also ground zero for many years, and I'm glad that we're now finding ourselves in compliance. But for many years, we were the right here, had the greatest air pollution problems in the entire state of Florida. So it would be appropriate, I think, that we do the most monitoring as well. I have a couple questions. When we talk about near road air quality, and we talk about pollution, and I had at one time looked at electric vehicles as being, I know that they will definitely reduce on carbon and NOx, but electric vehicles as being a kind of an answer to that, at least of that problem. But as I understand that even with electric vehicles, you have tire, brake dust, and particulate matter that's really quite extensive and still polluting. And now I guess we've heard a lot of the pollution, the small particulate matter in the bay that they said were plastics were actually tire debris in microfine particles from cars. Could you speak to that, Dr. Stewart?
Yes, definitely. So it's about the type of particle and the size range. So for tire wear and brake wear, and road wear, those particles tend to be larger sizes, more in your coarse range. And so you certainly can get some smaller sizes, but they tend to be larger. And so when we're mostly concerned, the biggest concern is about those combustion emissions, because those particles are really, really small, your ultrafine particles from combustion emissions. So although absolutely there's concern about the tire wear and so on, the thing that electric vehicles do is they reduce the combustion emissions, which are, from the health effects point of view, the most concerning. And they reduce them where people are. So if your power mix, depending on your power mix, they could overall, they generally tend to reduce pollution in your entire area. They could have impacts on pollution near your power plant, depending on how you're fueling your power plant. But as far as, what electric vehicles do is they reduce emissions of the combustion components, which are those fine particles of concern. Now, vehicles in general are still, going to be emitting tire wear, still going to be emitting particles from brakes and so on, and any solvents that are used in the vehicles as well. So it doesn't completely eliminate the pollution from the vehicles, just the combustion piece.
And one thing you said once you measure from the sides of the roadways, you're talking about 200 to 300 yards typically for the highest impacts, because I had even read and heard up to a mile.
So there's no cutoff, kind of like with the coronavirus 6 foot, there's no cutoff, right? It's just about what's the region where we see the highest levels, right? So yes, exactly. That's the region where we typically see the highest levels. But so we've done a lot of modeling work, and you see a pretty typical signature, those highest levels in those first those first several hundred meters, and then that falls off. It falls off, but it doesn't go away. I mean, you still see a signature for quite a ways out, because you just have repeated emissions. So as long as you have repeated emissions, then you're going to see that signature. And so that map that I showed was an annual average, and it really shows a clear signature of high near the roads and higher, lower, but descending for quite a ways out. So yes, it's not a matter of as long as you're 1,000 meters away, you're fine. That's not the case, right?
Right. I have to say I was totally fascinated in the new things that I've read, because I had understood that there was some watershed type of study in 2014 about near road air quality. And, I just feel like from our Florida Department of Transportation that now wants to move more cars, add lanes to downtown. Actually, they wanted to do it through I-4, obviously. It seems to me, in terms of this, we should be growing trees through the middle of that median, quite seriously. And that adding more lanes to 275 north of downtown, which that's what they're intending to do at this point. And I hope that maybe on the basis of air quality concerns, because what it does is drive more cars through, and then they try to justify that from this standpoint of exposing people to greater pollutants, that somehow moving cars through faster without hesitation, because they're moving through faster, that somehow diminishes the pollution rather than increases moving more cars through. I don't know if you can speak to that, but that is exactly what is a justification in the environmental report that they put out, that it's okay to move more cars through as long as they move through faster.
Yeah, I actually, we've done an analysis of this. So the factors are complicated. So there's not a monotonic relationship between speed and emissions. So increasing speed can increase or decrease emissions. So there's no clear monotonic relationship. With regard to the particular aspect about increasing the lanes and putting more vehicles there, we actually did an analysis recently. We just published an analysis of potential impacts, and see that at least in the short term, there would be a slight decrease in concentrations, but that the disparity would be worse, so that the populations who are currently overexposed will be even more disproportionately overexposed, but that the overall, at least in the short term, if you don't take into account induced demand, right? So there's an idea of induced demand, which is, that over time you might get more and more people choosing to live in places that they would then need to use the roadways more. And in which case, and our analysis doesn't do that, but if you don't include that, and you see a slight decrease, but an increase in disparity, increase in inequality.
Yeah, the other thing I thought some of the mitigations were really interesting, and this was, thank you so much for being here. It was so interesting to hear all this. But some of the mitigations you talked about is not actually putting residents next to the roads, which when they put the roads through residential areas and not putting schools. And honestly, when I found out all the effects of the pollution and how serious it is and impacts of community, and having lived and raised my children pretty near I-275, which I now regret with this new information, and in terms of my own health as well. But you talked about not building near them. And there's this idea somehow that we should have transit-oriented development around our interstates, which is to me ridiculous, because I think what you need to do is turn your back, at very least for protection, get as far away from an interstate as you can and turn your back to it in every possible way as a protective measure, and not be building next to them, not be widening them through communities. In terms of doing everything you can, and I guess trees are also another. So if there were free land at any place next to them, it would be opportunity, I guess, to put in trees as a mitigation. I'm just trying to think through with everything you said, how you possibly mitigate for the extreme damage that you're doing on communities of concern, on low-income communities, and everyone else.
I think that to the degree that you can reduce the amount of vehicles, that's the true approach that really has a major impact, is reducing the amount of vehicles that are going through communities. But there, and putting in things like trees and all of that, all of that are options there are a lot of things we could do that we're not currently doing, some of which we are doing, but there are a lot. But fundamentally, it is difficult if you have big roadways that are near communities to say, okay, well, what can I do now?
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. This was so interesting and important, I think, very important for us, and especially important at this time. So I'm glad to have an expert right in the community, and to hear that we have at USF, and I really appreciate the EPC bringing all the presentations forward. I thought it was very interesting. In terms of the individual monitors, I was very curious. My daughter lives in Toronto, and she was crowdsourcing with an air monitor and called me up and was talking to me about it. It made me very fascinated with if we could do that. I know we have a community around the expressway here that would probably be very interested in pursuing that. But there, as you so well point out, opportunities, but also issues in terms of that. So thank you for everything, and this was very interesting and very. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent discussion. Mr. Woodard, did you have something else, or was your hand up from before? Mr. Woodard?
It was up from before.
Okay. All right. Just to wrap up, Ms. Stuart, seeing nobody else in the queue, if you could show that slide number 6 again of the mitigating factors that you were just discussing with Commissioner Kemp. I wonder, I also was interested in it's number 6. Yeah, the mitigation measures. This is where, golly, I was about to say this is where the rubber hits the road, but where we can really begin to think about how to lower the risks for our community and our citizens. And I hear you saying that, the important thing is just less cars, less polluting, emitting vehicles.
Yeah, that is the most significant thing you can do, right? Everything else is sort of trying to, and sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to deal with the fact that you have the infrastructure you have. But when we're planning for new infrastructure, I think, and we're thinking about what's our vision for the future, that is the most significant thing you can do is thinking about transportation system design and infrastructure and focusing on things other than individual vehicles. That is.
Is there no other way to rank these or to understand like where we could get the biggest bang for our buck on any of these other mitigating measures?
Oh, I don't know that I'm prepared to rank them, but I guess I would, I think the biggest bang, especially if we talk about putting money into new infrastructure, I would go with this first system design. Can we think big picture? And then I think you can do things like roadway design. What additional features are we putting in that are going to create barriers, just like we do for noise? I do think that using vegetation, using those buffers is helpful. And I would go with, and then also land use specifications. But again, that's about new infrastructure. So if you're going to put new infrastructure in, why not, think about the transportation system design. So I guess I would put those up as the most. And I think these low emission zones are also found to be quite effective. But again, that's you're talking about reductions in vehicles, or you're allowing vehicles to go.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have one last question for Mr. Woodard. It was great news to see that Hillsborough County has got meeting all the air pollution standards for the first time. I understand in total compliance with air quality, but what period of time is that? And does this reflect any impacts of the stay home time here of COVID with less traffic? Is that impacting this at all, or how are we achieving this goal?
Yeah. When the EPA looks at attainment, they usually look, depending on the pollutant, they look at a 3-year period. So last year they made the designation. So it goes back from like 2019 all the way to 2016. Oh. So it wasn't affected by COVID. You actually have to show and demonstrate compliance, not just short term, but that you're meeting this continuously. Some things like ozone, they keep lowering the standard and we keep tightening the restrictions. And we've been fortunate because as the population has doubled over the last 30 years, industry has done a really good job of trying to reduce emissions, especially like TECO. But with COVID, that's the reason why we only showed the 2019 data, is because what we did see after, the shutdown in March was we saw about a 5 or 10% reduction, in actual ambient air quality levels. So there was an effect by COVID. So the earth is actually breathing a little bit now. But we'd like for it to breathe less, so we can all get back to work.
Is it fair to say then that it's our EPC working together with our local industries that is bringing that pollution down and helping us meet these standards? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it is. I mean, one of the biggest contributors to us meeting the ozone standard was, Tampa Electric, TECO. They spent over $1.2 billion at the turn of the last century to lower their emissions, put on add-on controls. But since then, instead of putting on add-on controls, generating the emission by burning coal, they've moved more and more to natural gas. I think they're burning about 70% natural gas. So things like that from our largest polluters, and that's basically because of a lot of regulations and enforcement. But the industry has taken the lead, and is working with the EPA as well as researchers like USF and UF to actually better understand what the data means. So it's a partnership.
Thank you. Thank you. And you can see there's just a lot of interest on this board and passion for this topic. I'm really grateful for everyone coming today. I do see Commissioner Overman wants to speak. You're recognized to wrap things up, Commissioner.
Excellent, thank you. And I do appreciate Mr. Woodward's comments regarding corporate cooperation and regulation making a difference. I moved to this area in '84 when TECO was not being a very good neighbor at the time, and the numbers have gotten so much better, and they have gotten so much better in things that they've done, and I appreciate that. But I do want to go back to one of the slides that Ms. Stuart presented, and you brought it up earlier regarding the mitigation measures. You know, we have historically made decisions to expand and work on our highways in such a way that the idea of mitigating pollution controls and noise has been sort of a nice to have. So for example, in the illustration showing wind flow, you know, there's a big tree and foliage to help mitigate the transmission of pollutants into, say, a community, for example, or to people. And historically, 275 has been promised to have sound walls and vegetation, and yet it has not happened in 25 years. We are, once again, are being promised that that's an option. But when our local economies, our local municipalities are left with the responsibility of maintaining it, if it's installed or not installed, it becomes problematic, because what is designed to improve the barriers to pollution long-term tends to be a failing equation, it sounds like. Because what we see when you go along the interstate, not only on 275 north, but also south, is very little vegetation that's used to actually assist in creating that environmental buffer in urban cores. And I think as a governing body, whether it be through EPC, through MPO, through BOCC, or whatever hats we happen to have, I think it's important that we make sure that in the decisions we implore, that we require those buffers, those mitigation factors. Otherwise, the project should not be approved, because they're necessary. They are part of the SEIS. They're part of the study and the environmental decisions moving forward. And yet, this is an important part of the environmental impact to our communities. Have you seen where, Ms. Stewart, have you seen where these have been implemented successfully and seen a true mitigation that has helped communities deal with that kind of pollution effect?
Yes, I mean, I would say I would refer to the research literature mostly, but there are studies. These have come from studies and literature where they really looked at when something had been implemented and it did have a positive impact. I would need to do a little work to find out some specific long range, some wide scale applications, but research studies do indicate they do have positive effects where they've been put in.
Excellent. So I would ask the EPC staff to work with Ms. Stewart to possibly make a presentation to our MPO, so that when we make decisions on any further expansion on the highway system within Hillsborough County or travels through Hillsborough County, that they understand what's required of that mitigation that should be in line with what we're being told are, favorable environmental effects. Because it does need to be part of the equation in terms of how we approach people getting around our county. And if less traffic is an option, that's great, but we are growing enormously and anticipate continuing to grow. So how we go about addressing people getting from one place to another is going to be critically important as far as a policy is concerned. And environmental is a very big piece of that. So I appreciate your research and look forward to seeing the partnership between EPC and USF in helping us make policy decisions moving forward when it comes to environmental impacts of roadway pollution. Because I will tell you, I really, truly, unfortunately, because of COVID, we all stayed home. But the difference in the air quality when we during that 30-day period was stunning, because I live right next to the interstate. And it was remarkable, the difference in the quality of the air during that time period. So it does matter in terms of the quality of life. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
And thanks to the team, Mr. Woodard, Mr. Waters, and Ms. Stuart for bringing forth these presentations, and everybody for participating in these very fruitful discussions. I think it does make sense to have this sort of thing at MPO. Of course, that's going to have to come from the MPO board, but I agree with you, Commissioner Overman, that it makes sense to continue looking into all of this data with all those other hats that we wear. And I'm really glad that we got this very meaty, detailed presentation on this topic and the discussions today. Thanks to everyone. So from here, it's Ms. Doherty with the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll be brief. I have a few slides for my Executive Director report, but before I move into that, I would like to thank, I think it's Dr. Stuart, I'm not sure, but Dr. Stuart for her presentation, Sterling Woodard, Reggie Sanford, and Jason Waters. We'd be happy, I don't want to speak for Dr. Stuart, but we'd be happy to go to the MPO. We will make sure this presentation is on our website as well for access for anybody who needs to utilize this data. I did want to point out that our air division, half of our agency comes from outside funding, and the air division is primarily funded through the EPA. And all those expensive monitors and the staff that go with them and the air monitoring group is funded by the EPA. So I just wanted to make that clear to the commissioners so they knew that, and perhaps for future decisions, who knows what will be happening with the DEP and the EPA in the next 12 to 24 months as well. I also wanted to mention that when we talk about air quality affects water quality. And if you remember, nitrogen deposition is a huge thing in the Bay. And also when we talk about microplastic, tires are also a huge thing in the Bay. So when you have issues with air quality, you also have issues with water quality as well. But once again, thank you for that great presentation, and I'll go through my slides very briefly. Elaine, could you do the first slide? Thank you. Florida Solar United Neighbors, Florida Sun, launched the 2020 Hillsborough Solar Co-op in July. EPC, Hillsborough County, and other partners created informational videos that were featured on the Florida Sun Facebook page on the day of the launch. As in previous years, the co-op is off to a strong start and has already reached over 50% of its membership goals. And as a side note, I was in the second or third co-op. I have solar on my house, and I could not recommend it more strongly to the citizens of Hillsborough County. There are still 3 informational sessions available to residents who are curious about going solar or having questions about joining the co-op. The information is on EPC's Facebook page and the solarunitedneighbors.org website. Next slide. In addition, EPC Sustainability Coordinator Michelle Jenkins served as a panelist for a webinar hosted by Florida Sun. She and other experts from around the state discussed solar technology, financing, and economics with interested businesses and residents. Michelle shared how co-ops have helped to promote sustainable living in Hillsborough communities by educating local consumers on solar technology and the benefits of solar co-op initiatives. This summer, Administration Director Elaine DeLue and I attended the USF Muma College of Business Post-Crisis Leadership Certificate Program. The course was free and had over 8,000 participants from 50 states and over 80 countries. The topics covered included navigating the transition from crisis to the new normal, leading a resilient team, assessing and mitigating risk and security, and establishing effective communication. It lasted several months, and I would like to thank our Director of Administration, Elaine DeLue, for recommending this course. Elaine also recommended a free luncheon course that is on Wednesdays with the University of Tampa on similar topics. So if you can avail yourself of the University of Tampa, they have some great leadership topics, especially in this new normal era. Next slide. EPC's two Sterling examiners, Nicole Garcia and Elena Glusica, just celebrated 5 years with the Florida Sterling Examiner Board. They were both recognized for their years of service and promoted to advanced examiner status. Next slide. EPC, through our commitment to the Sterling process and performance excellence, has worked hard to establish agency-wide telecommuting capability, operations, and process. Today, all our employees have the technical equipment and training materials necessary to stay connected in an online environment, whether they are working from home, in the field, or in the office. This was completed in record time and ensured that there was no interruption of EPC services to the public or the regulated community. To all of our dedicated staff, I'd like to give a shout out. They have been working during these very difficult COVID times and have kept our agency running flawlessly. And I'd personally like to thank the MIS team for all of their hard work and technical expertise. They have done an amazing job. EPC staff maintains a safe work environment and working conditions as you enter the RPS building. EPC is utilizing best management practices of the CDC, including but not limited to staggered scheduling, social distancing, facility and fleet sanitation, and wearing face masks at all times. We limit our staff operations at the office to an as-needed basis and to the essential few personnel that otherwise are unable to perform their work remotely. We have also implemented special check-in and drop-off procedures to ensure the safety of our employees and visitors. Our EPC lab participated in a 2-day certification audit in July. This annual evaluation is given as part of the Florida Department of Health Water Analysis Accreditation Program. This is the first time this audit has taken place in an online-only environment. The Petroleum Cleanup Team submits monthly work reports to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which are then audited each month. The state evaluates EPC's performance for quantity and quality of the work performed, timely review of projects, and completed data entry to the FDEP databases. The latest performance rating for May is 96.5%. We are proud that our cleanup program demonstrates excellence by consistently achieving rates in the high 90s. The EPC's air monitoring program has been deemed essential by the state. Our air technicians have continued to work tirelessly in the field, maintaining our air monitors and collecting vital ambient air data without interruption. The air monitoring program received a $35,000 grant from EPA this July to purchase a ceilometer. The ceilometer instrument will be added to our Sydney location and will be used to measure cloud height, a parameter that was recently added to the PAM's data collection requirements. And commissioners, with that, our next scheduled EPC, next slide, please. Our next scheduled EPC meeting is September 24th. And so that concludes my presentation unless you have any further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty, for that presentation. I have been very impressed by how quickly and thoroughly EPC ramped right up throughout your staff and processes into safe procedures during this pandemic. Very impressive, and glad to see it's working well for all of you.
So thank you, Commissioner. And again, I want to give all the accolades to staff. When this came out, I think a week before the county senior management met, and we mobilized to remove everybody from the office as quickly as possible to work remotely. And the MIS team made that happen. And again, can't thank them enough.
It was very impressive. I see no questions or comments from the board members, so that wraps up Section 8, the regular agenda. Is there anyone with any recommendations or suggestions for future agenda items? And seeing none, if there's no further discussion today, I will call the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a very safe afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll see everybody on
Bye-bye.
September 24th. Thank you so much.
Bye.